As of 2025, the United States carries a gross national debt of just over $36.1 trillion. Servicing that debt alone consumes nearly a fifth of all federal spending, creating a compounding mathematical trap. To test a potential exit from this trajectory, we built a closed-system quantitative simulation. We fed it an extreme political platform designed to stress-test the absolute limits of the economy. The governing philosophy of this model operates on 10% chaos. It assumes a populace willing to surrender specific personal liberties in exchange for a highly optimized utilitarian collective. We programmed the simulation with a 10-year timeline and two objectives. First, it must force an annual federal surplus. Second, it must reduce national homelessness by 83%. This simulation evaluates exactly how these extreme authoritarian controls interact with complex macroeconomic variables over a 10-year horizon. Measuring a systemic overhaul of this scale requires plotting the data across 4 distinct synthetic indices over a decade-long projection. This dashboard tracks the starting 2025 baselines. We are monitoring GDP growth, social stability, public sentiment, and global standing. By forcing extreme shifts in macroeconomic and social inputs, the simulation triggers instantaneous recalculations across all indices. We are testing for the specific mathematical threshold where top-down structural constraints successfully override social volatility. The first input in the simulation completely eradicates the traditional federal income tax. The replacement revenue engine starts with a flat 20% value-added tax. On top of this base, the model stacks 3 secondary streams: a 20% tax on legalized vice industries, a 5% federal gambling tax, and a 1% tax on undeveloped land. The final revenue input applies a 21% corporate tax rate to religious institutions, extracting an estimated $20 billion annually from previously exempt organizations. Stacking these inputs increases total annual federal revenue to over $7.3 trillion by year 4. By monetizing consumption and previously untaxed sectors, the model locks in an immediate federal surplus exceeding $130 billion a year. Securing that surplus allows the simulation to reallocate the $6.5 trillion federal budget. The most aggressive cut targets traditional defense. A massive $400 billion is diverted away from physical armed forces and divided evenly between artificial intelligence, national cybersecurity, healthcare access, and scientific research and development. The model also eliminates the foreign aid budget, capturing $50 billion for domestic infrastructure. This capital reallocation shifts national power from global military presence to domestic technological and biological resilience. To resolve the housing crisis, the simulation prohibits individuals from owning more than one home and outright bans both rental properties and corporate land ownership. This causes the collapse of the speculative real estate market, increasing the supply of available homes for single-family ownership. Simultaneously, the model replaces traditional social welfare programs with a universal basic income, a direct cash transfer strictly tied to a citizen's social score. This graph charts the result of combining forced housing availability with conditional UBI payouts. Over the 10-year timeline, homelessness drops from 580,000 to 100,000 individuals, while average UBI payouts reach $9,000 per year. These systemic improvements are mathematically dependent on authoritarian asset stripping and behavioral tracking. The final layer of the simulation applies market gamification to the structural branches of government. First, it dismantles the judicial system. The Supreme Court is replaced by an unelected technocracy, a fourth branch of government tasked strictly with quantitative policy review. The executive branch undergoes a similar shift. The presidency is stripped of administrative power, repositioned as a ceremonial figurehead functioning much like a royal family. This allows the state to monetize executive disputes. By broadcasting political arguments globally as a reality television spectacle, the government generates direct revenue. The simulation models the viewership for this spectacle after international celebrity culture, projecting 1.7 billion global viewers per election cycle. A final feedback loop ties educator salaries to 7% of total state tax revenues, incentivizing the system to maximize workforce productivity. Through these structural changes, the simulation engineers the government into a profit-generating loop. yielding billions of dollars per cycle from entertainment and streamlined administration. Fast-forwarding to the endpoint in 2035, the macroeconomic results show gross domestic product reaching $34.9 trillion, while the national debt drops to $24 trillion. This sustained surplus strengthens the U.S. dollar index, pushing it to 115 as the nation produces highly competitive, export-driven economic output. But the dashboard reveals the hidden friction in the model. This trajectory plot for public sentiment shows a multi-year dip that does not recover until 2028. That 3-year plunge models the early-stage volatility caused by the implementation of authoritarian constraints, property seizures, and social tracking. The simulation proves that the long-term math works, provided the system can survive the initial shockwave of public resistance. Every closed-system macroeconomic simulation contains a critical blind spot. The projected $145 billion surplus relies on 2 assumptions: total population compliance and the complete absence of capital flight. Quantitative optimization assumes that humans will act as predictable data points. Real-world political execution faces citizens who actively resist, hide assets, and subvert algorithms. The 10% chaos model balances the federal ledger on paper, but it ultimately reveals that the unpredictable friction of human behavior serves as the absolute limit on radical statecraft.